So how did we start off our day at Rhino Rally? That's an interesting story, and it also leads to one of the worst moments I ever had. Starting each day at Rhino Rally, the employees would either park up at the north end of the park, kind of along our center road, or right in the very middle of the park is an employee-only area, and there's a small 2-level parking garage there, along with several different buildings and other equipment and supplies that we would need. And then we would walk over to where we kept our Rovers parked. Our Rovers were parked not too very far from the 2-level parking garage. And after we would clock in, we would start the day by walking over to the Rovers and immediately starting off with our safety checks. Those would include inspections all around the vehicle, make sure there hadn't been any damage or unexpected things that had happened to them, that everything was working on them, the tires were all inflated, no dents, the fans were working, the lights were working, the horn was working, the sound system was working, and we'd give the whole Rover a real good once-over. We then also checked to make sure that the windshields were clean and that there was plenty of gas in them as well. After we had done all that, we would then take the Rovers and we would drive from that place along the road, make a left turn, go up and over this bridge that would then lead to the north end of the park. And after we crossed that, we would make a right turn, and that would take us out into the savannah. And Rhino Rally itself was actually attached to part of the savannah area. And so we would drive through that and then through a couple more gates. Once we would get through those gates, we would actually wash off the truck to make sure we weren't bringing in anything from outside that could possibly contaminate the animal areas. From the washing station, we would drive past the rhino pens, and then we would drive around and over towards Rhino Rally was actually based. All told, from the time you were sent to get a truck, to inspect it, clean it up, start it, make sure it was ready to go, and drive it back, it could take anywhere from 15 minutes to 45 minutes, depending upon what was happening, how much you had to check with the truck, if you needed gas, and if there were any holdups on the savannah. It was always kind of fun as you drive through savannah during park hours to bring a vehicle in, because there were times that you would get stopped and held up by the train as it would go by with all the guests in the park. And so you just kind of sit there and wave at everybody as they rode by on the train. That backstage area was also very interesting. The elephant cages were back there. There were other animal areas back there as well. The veterinarian center was back there. So if any of the animals needed medical care, it was there as well. It was also where all our deliveries came in. There were 2 entries into this area. One was away up at the north end of the park past Kumba. And you could drive in there. There was a security checkpoint that you would check in at. And then you could drive in, park on one of the side lots on the side of the road, or come all the way down into the middle of the park and park there. Our deliveries would usually come in at an entrance on the west side of the park. But when they decided to build SheiKra, because there was so much construction going on, they had to make some changes. And those changes led up to one of the biggest and worst events of my whole time at Busch Gardens. You see, the semis with all the deliveries would come into that west entrance. But once they started building SheiKra, they closed that entrance, which means the semis, instead of coming through the big wide open area into a huge area, had to turn around and they had to go all the way up to the north end down a narrow little 2-lane road that went through the middle of the park. That road actually had one spot where it had a bridge that would come over a couple of the walkways in the park, and it was sheltered so guests wouldn't actually even realize that vehicles were crossing over right in front of them. Well, our Rovers, after we got them ready, had to cross that same bridge. And of course, semis are a bit wide and Rovers are a little bit wide. I had a day where I had been sent over to pick up another Rover for Rhino Rally, to get it all prepped and ready and drive it back over to the ride. I had done that, and I was starting up on the road, and as I came up over this bridge, I stopped and realized that there was a semi coming at me. And as I'm sitting on the top of this bridge, I realized there's no way that semi can back up. And there is absolutely no way in the world that the 2 of us can get past each other on this bridge. We're too wide. It's not going to happen. Which leaves me as having to back up. If you haven't gotten a good look at the Rhino Rally Rover, us drivers kind of sit down in the seat a little bit. The driver's edge of the door comes up almost right at your shoulder, almost to your head, and you've got a little mirror there. And then you've got the seats that are actually elevated up behind you. I'm short to begin with. I'm only 5'7", so I don't have a real big height span. So I'm dependent upon these mirrors. And as I realize the semi isn't going to go anywhere, I stop and I try and look around. I can't see anything. Don't see anybody behind me. Don't see anybody around me. I put it into reverse and the reverse signal comes on. Deep, 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 deep. Trying to warn anybody who might be around. And again, I stand on the brake and I practically stand up in the Rover, trying to look around. I can't see anybody. I'm a little nervous because I'm on this bridge and I'm sitting on the top of it with the back end sticking straight out. I know I can't see real good, and I'm trying desperately to see if anybody's back there. I even honked my horn a couple times, trying to make sure that nobody's there. Finally get the courage up, and I start to back up. One of the things that Busch Gardens did at that time was they would have day camps. and they would have all these kids come in groups and they would shuttle them around. What I didn't know was a couple of the day camp supervisors, a couple college-age kids, were in one of the day camp vans right behind me. Thankfully, they didn't have any kids in the van, but this guy had come up so close behind me that I couldn't see him. I was on a different level than he was. I had elevated seats and elevated levels. Because I was on this slope, I'm looking out and I'm looking literally right over the top of his van and I can't see him. I've got my backup signal going. I've honked. I've waited. I'm hoping somebody's cleared. And so I start to slowly back up. I think I probably got less than 5 feet and all of a sudden I hear a horn. And right at the exact same time I hear this horn, you hear crunch! The trailer hitch on my Rover went right into his hood. Not good. Not a sound you want. At that point, I stop. I pull forward a little bit. I hear him get out of the van, and I stand up and yell, "Move! I've got a semi in the way! Get out of the way so he can get by!" Huh? Finally get him to get back into his van, pull out of the way so I can back up and get into a parking place near him. And we can let this poor semi who's been waiting this whole time to get by and do what he's supposed to do. Thankfully, with the whole incident, nobody was hurt. We didn't have any kids or any guests around, so there wasn't anybody that was in a dangerous spot. The speed was low enough that there wasn't any major damage, just a hood that was torn up some. Didn't take a whole lot to fix that. Now, Busch Gardens did a deal at the time where if you did something wrong, you would get what they would call a point. And if you watched my previous video about Not So Great Days, you heard about when I hit a rock. Well, I had gotten a point there. And combined with this they considered a major infraction. They went through and they inspected and they tried to say that, oh, you should have been able to see it. I'm going, I'm short. You put a 6'4" guy up in the front to look. I'm 5'7". It's like a foot difference. But they blamed me because, after all, this guy was right behind my tail. I should have seen him. Oh well. And so they looked me over and said, "You've been a good driver. Our guests enjoy you. We've gotten lots of compliments. We're going to send you for some retraining." It wasn't until afterwards that my area manager realized that I'd had this other little thing. She says, "You know, it's a good thing that I'd already signed off on your retraining because otherwise this probably would have gotten you fired." Like, I'm happy you made a mistake. What was my retraining? Driving a Land Rover for 12 hours in the backstage areas where only employees can go. Around and around, loop after loop with one of my training supervisors. Gee, I think I learned how to drive backstage after that. We had fun. We would tell jokes, played some music on the sound system. If you look at a couple of the pictures that I post, they're actually taken during a couple of those backstage driving tours because we had nothing else to do except drive in circles. The moral of all this, don't get stuck in a Land Rover where you can't see behind you and have somebody tailgate. Because otherwise, you're going to be in trouble when they don't move and you have to. Thank you so much for watching this. Hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, that's the truth. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. We didn't have any extra people in the vehicles. And then it took a lot of time for retraining. Could it have cost me my job? Yeah, although I don't think I should have been punished for it because they got off scot-free without having anything against them at all. For tailgating, not moving, not listening to signals. I didn't think that was real fair. But at least it didn't cost me my job. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it. Don't forget to share it. If you're enjoying these, subscribe. I'd love to have you on. Thank you so much.